This young boy got the scare of his life while walking through the jungle of Thailand. He had booked a holiday to this beautiful country, hoping to see as many wild animals as possible. After all, a jungle safari was a dream he had for many years. But his visit took a grim turn when one elephant started following him day and night. When he learned the reason behind that unusual behavior, he was shocked. Join us in the unusual for more gripping stories. The boy's first night there was a big success. From the beginning, he was staying in an extraordinary hotel. It was designed in a way that perfectly captured the beautiful surrounding jungle. There were large glass domes from which, thanks to their unusual design, you could see into the jungle from all sides. Groups of animals walked by daily, while at the same time leaving the visitors alone. The hotel had a strong and secure fencing system around its borders. It was minimalistic, so animals could still be spotted, but strong enough so visitors could feel safe while doing so. It was spectacular to see, and according to the tour guides, completely safe. At least that's what they thought. But as he almost fell asleep around 1 a.m. that night, he was suddenly awakened. His dome began to shake significantly, and John was completely thrown out of his bed within a minute or two. This didn't feel like a relaxed vacation at all. What was going on? He stepped out of his capsule and looked into the woods, and that's when he saw it. A huge Asian elephant staring right at him from the dense, dark jungle. They stared at each other for a few minutes, but when John took one step closer, the elephant went wild and banged its head hard against a nearby tree. Was he trying to hurt himself? Because the action looked painful to the inexperienced traveler. What strange behavior, John thought. Some of the other safari guests, as well as the tour guide, had woken up from the loud bang against the tree and came running out of their accommodations. "What is going on? Is there an earthquake?" John heard one of the guests yell. But when they got there, all they saw was a trembling John pointing his finger at an empty jungle. He explained what had happened, but the guide reassured him that elephants couldn't reach his capsule. Attempting to calm the others, he even suggested John imagine the elephant. However, the next day proved this wrong. John, skeptical, tried to sleep but remained awake, doubting his senses. He wondered what else could have shaken his capsule. He hoped he had imagined it, but the crushed fence the next morning proved otherwise. Despite trying to enjoy the safari, the elephant returned, disrupting John's plans. The next day's safari started calmly, but John felt watched. As the group moved quickly, he lagged behind, then heard banging. Feeling anxious, he saw a huge elephant standing less than 4 meters away, staring sternly at him. Positioned between towering trees, it had pushed aside the greenery with its tusks. John panicked as he realized the group was gone. Calling out yielded no response, and fear gripped him as the elephant advanced. Frozen before the 3,500-kilogram Asian elephant, John prepared for the worst. He had misjudged the situation. The elephant wasn't hostile. Its actions and the earlier shaking were attempts to communicate. With a loud cry, the elephant turned, seemingly inviting John to follow. Confused and isolated, John reluctantly followed the elephant through the jungle, finding the path surprisingly clear thanks to its efforts. Wondering where they were headed and what the elephant wanted, John whispered to himself. After about half an hour, they reached an open plain with a large feeding trough for elephants, placed by locals to prevent forest damage. "Are you trying to show me this?" John asked the animal, as the animal quickened her steps. But the elephant seemed to have no interest in the feeder. There were no other elephants in sight, and the gray giant beside him seemed to get more and more restless. So it wasn't long before the elephant's quiet walk turned into a full sprint. He had never seen elephants running before, so this was a special sight. But John didn't get a chance to enjoy it. In fact, something was clearly wrong, because this was not a sprint out of joy. The elephant was trying to guide him somewhere, and from the animal's haste, it was important, and he had to go as fast as possible. John tried to keep up with the animal and made every effort not to lose sight of the elephant, while trying to keep his heart rate at an acceptable pace. "I've been isolated enough for one day," the young boy spoke, motivating himself. The elephant had just disappeared around a corner when John heard loud trumpeting. It was a thunderous noise that covered a wide area. John arrived at the river and saw the gentle giant standing there by the water. At first, he didn't understand why the animal decided to wait here, of all places, but when he looked into the distance, he understood immediately what was going on. A group of elephants were standing there in the river, trumpeting wildly back at the elephant near John. John saw that they repeatedly tried to get out of the water, but the slope to the mainland was too steep for them. Each time, they fell on their backs back into the water, and there was no way they were going to make it out if they didn't receive help. So a young boy came up with a plan. He looked for the least steep part along the river and built a simple staircase there from fallen tree stumps. It wasn't an extremely stable structure, but it was the only thing he could do quickly enough to save them. Hopefully the stairs will hold, and hopefully these animals will trust me enough to follow me, John thought. John was now also climbing into the river himself and trying to shout as loud as he could, so that the elephants who were standing confused in the distance could hear him. He hoped the elephants would see his behavior as friendly and follow him to the stairs. He shouted twice as loud as he could, and then something wonderful happened. The entire procession of elephants got moving, and before he knew it, a horde of giants came bolting toward him. It was like watching a group of well-trained dogs answering the commands of their owner, John later explained. John confidently tried to bait the huge animals closer to his location, but he had to admit he was still quite nervous. These giants did not know him, and you never know how they are going to react when they're right in front of you. He didn't have long to think about this, though, because less than a minute later, the moment arrived. He braced himself for whatever could happen when they got to location and secretly crossed his fingers behind his back. John was surrounded by these Asian giants, and thankfully, they seemed to be behaving kindly. It almost seemed like they knew John was there to help them. But at that moment, both John and the elephants were still in the river. The water was not high. It barely scratched the knees of elephants standing in it, so they weren't in immediate mortal danger. But they couldn't stay here forever. John ran to the shore and showed the animals how to use his stairs. But would the animals get it? Would they trust him enough to climb the stairs themselves? John stood on the shore and watched the first elephant approach him slowly. The first step of his rescue mission was successful because at least he had managed to lure the animals to the side of the river. He already considered that a small victory, but all would be for nothing if the animals didn't dare to climb the stairs. John spoke in a low, soft voice, trying to lure the elephants in a calm manner. The first elephant clearly responded to this and was now walking cautiously toward John. And after a few missteps and watching a wobbly staircase, this elephant was actually able to get out of the water on the side. Now, for the rest. One by one, the elephants tried to reach John. It was laborious, but the stairs held out under the heavy weight, and the elephants seemed to trust John completely. It was now the last elephant's turn. She stood at the bottom of the slope, and for a moment she seemed to look around in panic. There was no more elephant behind her to give her a push. John noticed that this animal was scared. He reached out his arm and gently held her trunk in the palm of his hand, and that was just the touch the animal needed. She now reached over and looked at John, noticeably grateful. John was a hero, though he was still in shock and hadn't quite realized it. But the elephants were ready to show that to him now. All the animals were safely back on shore. All thanks to John's quick thinking and his cooperation with Bumba, the name John gave to the help-seeking elephant, who he felt deserved as much credit as he did, because if Bumba did not warn him in time, and if she Bumba did not make haste when she did things, could have gone completely different. John received an honorable encore from all the elephants present at the time of rescue. Loud trumpet sounds could be heard from miles away, and it did not stop there, for the greatest honor was yet to come for this young and brave hero. Bumba walked forward and did something incredible, something that would remain in the memory of John for the rest of his life. The more than 3-ton elephant lifted John completely off the ground and placed him on its back. The animal was clearly the leader of the group because, after a loud cry from Bumba, the entire rescued procession followed John and his new friend. Together they made the trek back to the camp where John was staying, and there, the hero of the day was safely dropped off again. It's amazing how humans and animals can understand each other. At times, we can communicate fully with these creatures, just on another level than we're used to. Language is just a barrier, but when you step over that obstacle, you come into a world of understanding. A year later, the young boy decided to go back to Thailand. Would these animals still recognize him? Exactly 1 year later to the day, John went back to Thailand. He booked the same capsule hotel in the hope of seeing his elephant friends again. He assumed the chances were pretty slim. The jungle was vast, and the guides he had contacted shortly before his new stay had told him that the elephants had not been seen for some time. But wonders never cease to amaze everyone in this world, for when John arrived at his accommodation a full year later, 2 of the elephants he rescued from the river were already waiting for him when he arrived. That is when he knew for sure he had made some special friends that day in the jungle, friends who would never forget him.